So today I want to go over just a tiny bit of Agile, a little bit of the history and philosophy of Kanban, but then spend the bulk of the presentation talking about parts of implementations of Kanban and why they're useful, so that you can make decisions about your Kanban if you go farther down that route. So, what is Agile? Agile development is a big umbrella. It has a set of values and principles that they multiple frameworks and methodologies, including Scrum and Kanban. They are all iterative in that they involve a repeating process, and incremental in that they chunk the work up into small pieces that can be independently managed. So the Agile Manifesto gives really the values for this whole umbrella. So they value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. They value working software over comprehensive documentation, value customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and value responding to change over following a plan. That is, although there's value of things on the right, the Agile philosophy puts more value on the things on the left. So a brief history of Kanban really goes back to the end of World War II, when Toyota Manufacturing was visiting the United States to try and figure out how to jumpstart their manufacturing work in a post-war footing. One of the places they toured was the Willow Run factory for B-24 bombers, which was the epitome of manufacturing in the Ford assembly methodology. And really what they decided is that this was just way too expensive a model. It involved figuring out all the parts and then manufacturing all the parts and then putting it into subcomponent assembly runs and then full assembly and test phases. It was just too expensive, and ultimately they viewed it as wasteful. Every time you have excess inventory, you're spending time and money managing that extra inventory, producing it, and they just couldn't see how they could afford to do that. Legend goes that they, when they were in the United States, they looked at supermarkets, and one of the people on the trip had the bright idea that taking sort of a supermodel approach to manufacturing might work for them. In other words, they set up a work center that needs parts, and when they need more parts, they'll go to a store shelf in really a inventory sub-center and withdraw the parts that they need to restock the shelf so that manufacturing can continue, and only when they've done a withdrawal from that storeroom do they remanufacture to refill that stockroom. Just like you have a back room in your supermarket that orders more when that pallet of Cheerios gets empty. Okay? And this is an example of a Kanban card. Kanban actually means card in Japanese, or billboard, some translations. And this is a Toyota manufacturing Kanban card. And it's basically a form of currency in the manufacturing environment that says you can now go build X more of these subcomponents because the ones that we had have been withdrawn from the stockroom and are out on the floor somewhere. And that's the basis of the Toyota method of manufacturing, which has really been adopted very widely. So all of that's in the manufacturing realm, but it's been translated into how to use that same philosophy in technology businesses as part of the agile set of frameworks. David Anderson wrote a book on how to do this adoption. It's one of the few books on Kanban in technology businesses, and is very widely read and easy to understand. Basically, it takes the approach of first you have to understand that Kanban is designed for a continuous flow of work. Much like an assembly line, you want to keep feeding the system, keep work going. Bits and pieces of work, but a continuous flow, just like you have cars moving down the assembly line. And the method that they use to start this is start by defining a value stream to show the steps that your technology process needs to take something from the beginning of what you're tracking to the end of what you're tracking. So you have to define those beginning and end points of where you want to establish control for a particular process, and a company can have many Kanban processes if they want to. And because the technology work is inherently invisible, a common way to visualize this workflow is to use cards on a wall where you have columns that represent each process in your value flow. One of the other key attributes is that this is a pull system. That part of the way that they reduce waste, increase efficiency, is to limit the amount of work that's in progress. So instead of things piling up on the slowest process in your value stream, the idea is that you establish work in process limits for most of the processes, and you only bring in a new chunk of work into the process when you finished one of the items and created an open slot, as it were. So one of the things that can do is it can help you identify blockages, areas that might need further refinement, and also allows the entire team to look to see if there's anything they can do to help out that blocked area. So managing the flow is part of a Kanban process. There are several metrics that can be used, but the primary metric is called cycle time, and we'll talk more about that later. Some of the other reports that typically are more likely to come from an electronic version of a Kanban board are cumulative flow. It's something where if you were doing it manually, you'd have to keep track of some information every day and manually chart it out or put it in a spreadsheet. So one of the important parts of Kanban is to establish exit policies for each column so you know when you're done. So not only when the item is completely done, which is very important, your definition of done for the entire value stream that you're emulating, but also identifying the exit policies or the definition of when that column is done can be very useful as far as keeping everyone on the same page and focused on what needs to be done before it can move on. Feedback is an important element, both in terms of with the stakeholders and in terms of inside the team. So part of Kanban is setting up a regular schedule to meet with stakeholders for discussion and prioritization and feedback about how are we doing. And separate from that, to get together on a regular basis to meet with the team to talk about what's going well, what's not going so well, how can we improve our process, what have people noticed recently. And the Kanban system really encourages you make experimental changes in your process, monitor it, see how it goes, try and evolve your process over time as you get insights to gain efficiency. So, any questions about that so far before we look into the examples and their parts? Okay. So this is one of my favorite example boards. It has a lot of different pieces. You don't have to use all of them, but we'll walk through some of them. But the starting point is designing your work process flow. So in this particular example, it starts with, goes from ready into elaboration and acceptance criteria, development, test, deployment, and then the done column. So that's where it's completely closed out and outside of the process. So at any point in this process, if there are, for example, tests where it doesn't meet the acceptance criteria, that card can actually go back or be held up until it's cleared. So even though we put a work in process limit on, for example, the development column of 4 items, it is possible for something to go into test and then to actually go back a step for a little bit of rework if the acceptance criteria are met. So laying out the Kanban board, there's that first column is story queue for things that are waiting to work. That top strip is an optional thing that I think is very important. It's an expedite track. And usually the rules are stakeholders, by agreement of all the stakeholders, can declare any story to be expedite, but you can only have one in that entire process at a time, because what expedite means is that as it goes through each step, it has to take priority over work that's in progress. So it's drop everything and work on this. Now, one step short of that.
I was going to say, can you picture mentally where we would have that? We've had an expedite as kind of a running joke, probably once a week for about 8 weeks or so. And part, I think, of the story, too, is if you picture this as a physical representation, some of the frustration that we've dealt with internally is the fact that those people who are kind of sitting patiently as green cards, right, in one of these things, they just don't have exposure to the fact that there's something trumping them, right? They're kind of pulling rank over the stuff in there.
It is very important that all of the stakeholders be on board when that card's played.
Yep.
One step short of that would be to jump to the head of the queue, but again, changing the order of what's in that story queue, those five items that everyone has agreed that are the top priority, changing the priority of that, again, should be mutual agreement of the stakeholders to say, this isn't quite expedite, but it needs to go up on the list.
Right.
And really, the responsibility should be on the stakeholders to make those calls by mutual agreement. Some organizations use, some form of round robin, but basically, getting the stakeholders to discuss and negotiate among themselves is usually the most fruitful way. One of the things that I want to emphasize here is that you notice that there's 5 items in that story queue that we've agreed are top priority, the next highest things to work on. Nothing else below that has to be ranked. So if I meet periodically with the stakeholders, let's say that they decide once a week what's the most important, then you can come to the meeting and say, we have 3 slots available this week to pull new items in. What are the next 3 most important things? And so those can be established week by week. Obviously, the stakeholders are going to be thinking about what's in their pocket to pull out that's highest to them as they're going along. They may even have a plan for over the next 3 months. I want to make sure these things get done. But that's something that they can worry about rather than working with the entire team to do a prioritization of 39 items where over the course of a quarter you may you may get half, another 15 items in that are higher priority than the bottom 15 in the queue. So avoiding waste on prioritizing items that don't need to be prioritized is part of this process.